created my own little algorithms to do one thing or another, like disease states, a mortality algorithm. And
I think you will have a whole levels of robotics, that humanoid robots or non-humanoid robots, whatever the case is.
But the one that I really gravitated towards was Alteryx. Low code, no code, business intelligence stuff, data science, machine learning, things like that.
Audio or text, and then there's big metaverse buzz. Everybody knows the metaverse.
Another week of AI.
Another week of AI.
Hey.
All right.
And you know, the reason we named it AI is because you got to go through so many emotions to talk about hardware stack, data stack, the software stack. I say I am a hardware obsessed guy, stuck on software and lost in data, right? Because data is just too wide. Software is just something you cannot escape. And then the hardware is like, oh my goodness, do I even want to get started with hardware, right? But I love hardware, right? Because that's what you can actually drop in your feet and say, ouch, right? That's real, you know, it's nothing like vaporware that we call software, right? It disappears under the sunlight. You know, it's been such a long time since I've spoken with you, Robert. I got a lot of things that I want to catch up with you on, but I've been waiting for this moment to kind of just say, at one point, I'm going to get to speaking about hardware, and it's going to be Robert all over again, right? Because you know, we've had multiple semiconductor chips guy that came in and talked to us about hardware, the semiconductor chips level. But I said we need a perfect combination of you and Leonard, because you know, Leonard earlier was talking about Vietnam era hardwares. We're like, all right, we're gonna have multiple levels of hardware.
I am a relic.
we gotta have hardware.
I can take you from the Stone Age to the Space Age. How about that?
Yeah, and this hardware conversation is really something that I look forward to, because more I expose people to how AI works, how the infrastructure works. One of the biggest gap, I think the single biggest gap, is hardware, right? Yeah. Is data next one? Yes, absolutely. Because everybody knows something about software from some aspect, but they cannot fathom how big the data world is. But one of the things that they really go missing on is hardware, because they haven't really seen hardware, and they don't really know what hardware means outside of just being called device. Right?
Yeah.
And then you want to lose them even further. You talk about fabs, semiconductor chips. You talk about the world of supply chain that is 1,000,000 miles long, right? Really, really gets the conversation going. But I think we're shifting a little bit. You know, at least since last 3 years, we're seeing a lot of this conversation about, hey, cloud native, we're about to go hybrid. We've been cloud native. We're going straight back to the way it was 25 years ago. We own the full hardware stack. No more cloud. And if we do cloud, it's a private cloud, right? Just lots of amazing things are happening. The shift is just, you know, I don't mind this tsunami. Like, this is why we call the AI, is because at the end of the conversation, you either feel more excited or you are just, my shoulder hurts from carrying all these, you know, things that we have to talk about, right? Kind of like, you know, any language you look at, there's a version of somewhere. So we just said either you're excited or you're just, you know, not enjoying the moment.
Yeah.
They just feel like a tsunami, one after another. I'm not going to talk about something today, which is the software and data part of it, because that's what we're going to do next episode. We're going to talk about AI agents. We're going to talk about CloudBot, these cybersecurity nightmares that are just popping up everywhere. So I call it a tsunami, but a bloody tsunami, in my opinion. So we're going to specifically focus on hardware because we literally have the subject matter expert in the room, right? So we're going to stick to the hardware, because if we can convey one message about hardware to anybody, is that if you want to talk about data ownership, if you want to talk about data security, you want to talk about everything you do in the stack that makes you billion more than your competitors, is because of your hardware stack.
Mm-hmm.
Show me your hardware stack. I'll show you where the money is, because you definitely don't have the data. I can tell you that much right now. And I'm a data guy. You don't have the data. You just don't. Show me the hardware stack. I'll tell you where the billings are sitting at, right? I see you shaking your head because you're about to jump in. But before you guys jump in, I'm going to do something that you guys won't do yourself, right? I'm going to talk you guys up, okay?
Oh.
I'm going to talk you guys up because you're not going to do the intro like I will, right? But
Okay.
then you get to do your intro. So, Leonard, me and you have been talking about this stuff because me and you are in the logistics side of things. We've done many, we've done, I've done quarter of maybe percent or 1% of what you have done, but we've done some of it. I have some similarities to what it is that you've worked on, and you're a legend in your field, right? I'm talking about a legend told me that you're a legend, so that just makes you.
Oh no, I know he didn't say that.
In the military, if you've seen a mission accomplished anywhere, it's because of the logistics behind it. The people that does the actual magic is the logistician. They're all wearing the same uniform, but the logistician is just behind the scene making 100% of everything happen. Tell that to a guy in Kandahar, Afghanistan, who did not get on the plane on time. Yeah, he's going to find a logistician, and that's the first thing he's going to do is run after a logistician and say, "Save me, please, because I missed my."
That's right. That's right.
Because I did not get on a plane as a cargo, because there's no passenger in a military aircraft. It's a cargo. The weight didn't match, right? So this logisticians are the magicians, and when I say there's a legend in logistics, that's Leonard Jefferson, right? Your ability to teach, your ability to articulate things to the last mile guy, right? The person who's going to receive that ammo, receive that weapon that has the right sort of buttstock in it. He does not know you, but he will feel your presence when he's down the range in Iraq or Afghanistan, or let's say Iran these days, right? So thank you for what it is that you have done and you've been doing, and you're still contributing because you're moving us into the AI direction, which is that legit conversation we're supposed to have about AI.
Oh, yeah.
Conversation that is to say, this is not something that you just go through the cycle of hype. You have to strategize. You have to prepare for that. So that strategic logistic technologies, I really, really appreciate what you're doing, and I'm really glad to see that we're going to work together in the near future. And then as far as Robert Quinn goes, this is where people just says, all right, stops. My brain hurts. Because some of the stuff that Robert you've been talking about, my goodness, like you cannot draw a picture. But we're going to show a video just to kind of capture some of the things that Robert will talk about. But we'll do that sometime in the middle of the show. But if I can say one thing about Robert is that the fact that you can break this down to a CEO, to a person who's never thought about anything of hardware other than just paying for it and having somebody use it. And all of a sudden, you're in a school environment prepping the next generation of semiconductor chips engineers, semiconductor chips users, semiconductor chips stewardess, the responsible person who's going to take this technology and create the latest innovations that we are all benefiting from today. Because how can I explain semiconductor chips? I think you can do a better job. But one of the things that I describe it is that if there's any time you have thought about a possibility of a gate where things can travel through, think about semiconductor chips. Like, that's how small those gates are. Those are magic, literally happening in front of our eyes 24 hours a day. We just don't know they exist, right? And that's because of semiconductor chips, that industry that you're in. So really want to break here and have you guys introduce yourself. But I really, really am so passionate about hardware, and it's because of you guys. You guys are rock stars in the hardware space. So Leonard, did I do it justice in introduction or what?
I appreciate that. I never heard that term applied to me before, but that's okay. But yeah, no, Asif, I really appreciate the introduction. And thank you for inviting me onto your program. The thing that drives me right now today is trying to my lane is basically getting artificial intelligence to the masses, and The people that I've already encountered, I get a lot of, I don't like AI. They're very suspicious of it, and and things, and I make them feel comfortable with what I'm doing.
Right.
And doing that, within an hour, I have them very comfortable, very relaxed, and ready to jump in to do things. My primary lane is in the LLMs, and with Chat GPT, Gemini, Copilot, Claude. I've played around with all of those. My favorite, and not to be, I guess, putting one above the other, is Gemini. And the reason why is because of all the tools that are available, where you can get up and running very quickly for very little or no money. And that's the thing that a lot of people are looking at, as far as that. But that's where I'm at now. When I was in the military, I worked, basically, supporting the troops on the front line. I worked started out in a stock control section in a warehouse, and then in the mid '80s, I was an advisor to the Reserves and National Guard, with logistics, supply chain type stuff. And then I moved into, while I was still on active duty, into IT, because I had, when I went to Fort Lee, which was my last stop, I was the supervisor of 53 instructors with automated logistics. And we had to develop our own lesson plans, and we had to get everybody, we taught everybody from privates all the way up to colonels, as far
Right.
as logistics at Fort Lee. So, and then when I got out, I got into corporate and did a lot of web development, because I got on early, so I went from emails to web development to database administration, programming, and so on. And then my last job was here at Rock Island Arsenal, where we imaged computers and things and that was really exciting, because I got a chance to travel all over Europe and do those type of things. So it was really exciting.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
Rock Island Arsenal because RIA, right? That's part of
yes,
our
right.
whole supply chain planning, ERP,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
manufacturing intelligence.
Yes.
RIA was probably the third biggest customers that I've dealt with.
Hmm.
That was the U.S. government contracting. So, okay, Mr. Robert, how did I do? Did I do a good justice of,
Did a
your
good job.
introduction?
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Asif. It is great being with you on the show today and joining you. It's yeah. I mean, I like to use the analogy of where I'm drinking water out of a fire hose.
Yeah.
I mean, this AI, the hardware, this whole information technology stack that's moving in us right now. As Elon says, it's a tsunami moving in us at light speed. I mean, honestly, and I'm up till 3:00 in the morning every day, reading the news, trying to figure out what's going on. How does it apply to us? And how is this going to change this or that? And from geopolitics to, just everything, the geopolitics, the supply chain, the technology changes that are happening. How does it change? How does it affect the industry? Is it going to set us back? Is it going to move us forward? And who's it going to affect? And it's just so much to keep up with. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable to keep up with so much of this information, Asif. But I enjoy it. I get to write and talk on LinkedIn and talk about the semiconductor industry and talk about this from the geopolitics to the supply chain issues to the mergers and acquisitions that's happening and the technology that's changing every day. I get to talk about it from 30,000 feet and look down on it and try to paint a bigger picture of where this is all going. So it's good.
Well, you got a huge following on LinkedIn, and definitely people that are interacting with you, they are seeking out that information and they want to seek it out from a specific way of telling the information that they need. Because there's just no other way. You really have to use a human language to identify why is this hardware so important, and why is nobody else talking about it? Why is there such a lack of describing the importance of semiconductor chips? Because every conversation I can get into right now, so you know me, Robert. I think when I engage, I don't engage with techies because techies knows a lot of the things that we have to talk about, but they're not necessarily driving the tech industry. It's the non-techies that are driving the industry. They're making that investment. They're believing it from banking perspective, their return on investment perspective, shareholder, venture capitalist. These are all mostly non-techies. So really have to sit there and tell them a story of that return on investment. But they don't want to hear return on investment because you have a software. They want to believe it because you can describe it through the process of AWS owns your hardware stack, you rent those hardware stack, you process the data, and then that data becomes a magic and everybody's all of a sudden clicking it like ChatGPT and buying it, right? A subscription of $20 a month makes you $200 million. So this story that, you really have to articulate to wide audience, which in my understanding, there's 97% of US population are not in the tech industry.
Yeah.
And now imagine how many of them are in the semiconductor chips industry out of that 3%, right? Because most of our semiconductor chips is overseas. So I guess we can start the conversation here about the people, really, because the people side of things is where we really find a lot of passion. Like Lenin just said, I'm talking to people about bringing their fear down about AI, because more fear creates a distance, but curiosity brings you a little bit closer, right? And of course, you're talking about, dealing with people and giving them that understanding that they need to understand in order to pick the next career, pick the next best hardware, or at minimum getting started, like we talked about with Vault. But let's talk about the people side of things. Like, what are you seeing from the people side that you think is it's kind of like a positive or just a detriment, right? Like, how do we deal and talk to people about these hardwares that are specifically less for AI or just cloud, data processing, period.
I always make the joke, talking about, how, how people just don't understand this technology. They don't understand what we're doing. I always, talk about how we hired 100 people at the startup that I did out of San Francisco. And I can't tell you how many of the employees came to me and said, "Hey, I Googled the word semiconductor today, and you were all over the place. It was great to see you. Great to meet you." And I'm like, "You just started working at a semiconductor firm and you Google the word semiconductor today." I mean, it's I always have to laugh because my wife we would go over to a friend's house for dinner, and they would say, the husband would pull me into his back office and he said, "So your wife tells me that you work on computers. Let me show you my computer problem that I'm having." I'm like, I'm an atomic layer deposition engineer. I don't work on computers. I work on semiconductors. And, trying to get people to understand that, what is a computer? What is a semiconductor? What is a chip? How is it made? But we have as far as workforce goes, we've got a big problem. We're doubling the size of the semiconductor industry in the next 8 years. And there is 0 people in the pipeline to fill those roles. And the worst problem is that the average senior engineering age right now is 50. So that means they're going to be retiring a lot of people in the next few years. And with the doubling of the industry at the same time, that's a big problem. President of the United States and everybody is looking down at this going, "Oh my gosh, we've got a big problem." So how do we build this workforce? How do we get people to understand what semiconductors are, why they're important, and not Googling the word semiconductor the day you start working for a semiconductor firm. We need to get, I was just in Dallas working I was speaking at Texas Why Texas event, and it was a really cool event. We had all the state representative, the Department of Army Labs, all the mayors, a lot of the mayors from Texas, and organizations like Intel and TI, and everybody from Texas focused on. We're sitting at one board meeting and speaking about the growth of the semiconductor industry. And man, we've got to tell a story. We've got to get people to understand what this technology is, and they've got to be able to speak the language and understand, and we've got to start in 6th grade. We've got to start getting kids excited about, semiconductors and understanding what semiconductors are in 6th grade. That's, we can no longer continue to do what we're doing right now. And so getting the kids excited about it, teaching the next workforce, getting them excited about this technology and this hardware, moving this industry is moving at light speed right now. And I had some really cool conversations with the Department of Army Labs and some other, how you're talking about the military. How does military keep up with this change? Oh my gosh, it's moving so fast. How do we legislate, government, how does government legislate around this at the speed that it's moving? And there's so much to keep up with and so much to understand. And it's hard for me to wrap my mind around some of this, let alone people that, work in government. I was actually invited to I was flown out to Washington, D.C. to go speak at a digital twin conference and to look at that and speak with the Department of Commerce and some other NIST and some other organizations. They didn't understand the technology. They'd have no clue what atomic layer deposition is. They have no clue what goes in behind the supply chain that makes this whole thing happen. So, how do we educate the world really about this? And it's a big problem that we have to start with at the very foundation and the ground level of building this whole ecosystem up right now. So,
Leonard is just like mused.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on what you're saying about government. That it is a challenge. So one of the things that when I was working at Rock Island Arsenal, it was sort of like a mid-tier organization, operational level, which is sandwiched between strategic and technical.
Mm-hmm.
So the people at that level, there are certain things that when they get focused in on something, this is what drives them. They're more interested in, they're reluctant to change, okay, what they're doing. So you have to sell them and really convince them that this is going to work for them to get away from that comfort zone that they're in right now. And so that was, I had it when I was at Rock Island. It was a challenge because I was the guy that was setting up the teleconferences and doing these things and trying to get people to step over. And if they were doing it one type of way and I'm coming in with something new, it's like, well, prove it to me, sell it to me. And I had to do that. It worked, but it was a challenge because about 10 years ago, we had this program for maintenance management and supply management, but and it was we were converting over to an ERP type system, and the Pentagon had it was a program that they had a contract to do that. They wanted us to do that to replace what we were already using. Mm-hmm. And so what happened when they came through, we had a budget of about $30,000. It was going to be 3 of us. We're going to travel all over the world and deliver this product. And then when there was a meeting and my supervisor came and says, the general pulled the funding. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, and by the way, you still got to do the project. I said, wait. How are we going to do this project with no money, right? And about 15 minutes later, I get this call from Fort Hood, Texas, with the IT guys down there. And it was one of our subordinate commands. And they said, we heard you need our help. I said, what do you mean? And they introduced me to this program for remote teaching and all that. So I learned it. And then we had to, had at different times, teach remotely,
right,
10 years ago, right? Before the COVID and everything else.
Yeah.
So, and I convinced my supervisor, because they were like, okay, they wanted to use something that was clunky and old and took a long time.
Right.
The software that they introduced me to, I learned it in 4 hours and got it up, got it going, and we were successful, and we were able to accomplish the mission. That is what's happening now, where, people are reluctant, but when they see it and they see how quickly they can learn it, then they're going to jump in and do it. But you got to really make them feel comfortable. That's what I found. Yeah.
Yeah. And the challenge right now is that you have so much of the hardware and the software that's coming through those hardware and the data that is just being overflown through it.
Mhm.
It's like almost magic, right? People that you're talking about with VTCs 10 years ago, video teleconference,
Mhm.
they had that transition of like, let me go step by step. I know I've seen TV before. Now that I see VTC, it's not that far off. It's not a magic anymore.
Right.
It's just I've seen it on Star Trek already, right? But some of the things that are happening right now is like literally, how do you write an essay in an instant second, right?
Mhm.
I'm not even wondering what sort of hardware you use for that. I'm just wondering what else you can do because my imagination is running forward, not trying to figure out the infrastructure under it, right?
Right.
Now, look, I don't think everybody needs to understand the infrastructure, but my goodness, if you're a general, if you are a decision maker, if you're a business leader, if you are somebody who's going to make sure that somebody gets paid for next 30 days or 30 years or whatever the case is, you got to make sure you feed their paychecks so you can have money and you can keep them employed. You really got to make sophisticated decisions based on this infrastructure.
Mhm.
Because if you don't catch on to the infrastructure today, like today it's sort of like advanced technology. These technologies are about to disappear. And you're going to have a brand new sort of technology come through. And all of a sudden you're going to wonder like, wait, what? Like infrastructure, like I got to learn it all over again. Because this is a kind of that transition time for the infrastructure versus how it used to be. That clunky box, that bare metal that you have to carry over your shoulder in order to put it somewhere and do some wiring to it. Like those days are almost disappearing, right? Because the configuration setups are changing. The size of this bare metals are changing. Then the scope of this bare metals is going from you need 10 of these to 10,000 of these, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how big of an operation you're running as a business leader. You have to really not just force your individual teammates to learn about this infrastructure, but you have to get behind them. Because if your teammates are getting fooled about infrastructure, you are next, right? Because you wrote that check, now it's bouncing and it's going all over the crazy places. So I say all of that because, from cybersecurity perspective, from social engineering perspective, so many other ways we can talk about it. But these hardware, like that VTC part you mentioned, 10 years ago when somebody saw VTC, they weren't thinking about deep fake on a remote chats today.
No.
They're not thinking about like, wait a second, literally a digital twin of me can join this call and you won't even know who I am unless you tell me to check the back of my head and that's the only way I'm fake. You're not thinking that 10 years ago, but if you're not thinking about it today, you're not thinking about the future. And that to me is super scary, not just for everybody, but specifically people that are writing checks and people who write checks for other people to be employed. Because a lot of the times we're talking about employment being disappearing because of AI, but we're not talking about what happens if a company does not shift and transition in the right direction. All of a sudden, even the check writers, the decision makers are out of business. And that means they're taking everybody with them, right? So these transitions, and I'm going to specifically refer to 2 weeks ago, what has happened in Wall Street, right? And so this is not my fear that I'm, putting out into the internet. This is something that's happened in Wall Street just a few weeks ago because they call it SaaS apocalypse, where the SaaS companies have shown a high revenue, but they could not show a future outlook for their industry, right?
Wow.
SaaS apocalypse means that companies are showing high revenue, but they're saying our software is no longer relevant. We're not going to be in a business for next 2 years. And along with the same report, there was another report, some study that was done by I'm not going to try to say the name, I forgot already, something with C. That report came out and they said, by 2027 and 2028, based on these software companies' inability to employ people, we're going to have a massive ripple throughout the economy. And that's not good for us. I'm talking about like national level shakeups in employment market, right? So these sort of hardware conversation, I'm really, really trying to get people to get started on it because of something you and Robert, me and Robert, we've been talking about for a long time, is that your hardware stack is not going to be 10 anymore. It's going to be 10,000. And the reason it's going to be 10,000 is because you're going to need that much more hardware to run your own informational operation, right? That IT system that you have today, which is very cloud-based, all of a sudden it's going to start shifting. You're going to see more devices coming your way. And this device is going to be run through a large language model like ChatGPT. They're going to be IoT devices. They're going to be sensors all over the place, right? These technologies that are coming down the pipeline is going to make your monitor disappear. It might make your laptop disappear. You might just have to be, start speaking like a Star Trek, right? Start talking to your system rather than actually typing in things like you're a caveman. You know what I mean?
And I see the foundation of it all is hardware.
Foundation of it all is hardware.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm excited, guys. Are you guys excited?
I'm stoked. I can't wait. I can't wait to see what happens. But yeah, I mean the foundation of it all is hardware. And we have to we're moving to the edge. Where your inferencing is going to be done on the edge. That means in your device. What does that mean? That means that you're going to replace your laptop, you're going to replace your computer, you're going to replace your phone, you're going to replace your watch and everything else, because that edge AI hardware is going to live on your device. What does that mean? We need a new hardware in all the devices, AI, the IoT devices, your watches, your phones, your laptops, your iPads, everything has to be replaced now, because now that edge AI hardware is going to have to live on that device.
Tell me about it.
So foundation again is hardware, right? And security now. Security is no longer a software issue, not just a software issue. Now it's a hardware issue. We need security. We need hardware built in. We need hardware made for security within the devices. Yeah. So again, hardware. We need hardware. We need lots and lots and lots of chips in the very near future.
And we're manufacturing those things in the US. So when we're talking about people, the shortage of amount of expertise we need for that, first of all, it's almost non-existent. We're talking about 60,000 shortage of just engineers. We're not talking about the whole supply chain. We're just looking at the fab perspective, right? To manufacture this hardware in US, build that supply chain that is really, really wide. And a lot of the cities and a lot of the states are not really even prepared what is being asked of them, right? Because when we talk about data center, first thing people talk about is electricity. People talk about water shortages. Well, what about fabs? What does fab require? Yeah, same thing as data centers, but these fabs are in a whole nother intricacy, right? Because the supply chain is not the same as a data center. You cannot just order a bare metal hardware and have it delivered. You have to buy a $250 million ASML product to develop these chips, right? I think you called it a $1 billion row, right? The $250 million ASML chips stacked side by side somewhere. So this sort of hardware conversations that we really have to have, we have to have it from multiple perspectives, right? A buyer's perspective and a builder's perspective, right? Because if you're thinking about just buying things just the way you do today, you're going to have one outcome that is based on somebody else's hardware that you rent. But if you're a builder's hardware, all of a sudden you see those hardware stacks that we were talking about. That's kind of like you own it and they sit right under your feet. You're literally standing on your own data. You're not worried about transferring your data somewhere else to the internet. We were talking about edge devices. Edge devices means you can have a 70 TPS, 70 trillion, TPS stands for what? Trillion processes per second, right? Trillion tera processes per second. So that device that is like less than $500 sits under your desk and it is running your AI on the edge, right? So the data ownership changes because you're a builder AI. You're talking about how you process that data and who do you deliver it to, and what sort of data do you deliver because you own the hardware changes, right? You can do now hybrid hardware, as in some hardware is in the cloud, some hardware is in a data center, and some hardware under your feet, right? But all three of them runs on a private cloud that has nothing to do with AWS or Microsoft, right? So you have all the shifts coming. And if you're not analyzing this information ahead of time, one of the things that you're going to run into is the queue for the hardware, because that queue is so long right now. Yeah, I'm going to pause right there. Let you guys talk more about that, because this hardware attacks are just insane at this point.
Yeah, Robert, I have a question. ASML, that's the company out of the Netherlands. Is that correct? Okay.
Yep.
So from what I understand, they are the only company that makes the type of hardware to develop those chips that are at 2 nanometers and smaller, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
So who besides TSMC is using that equipment?
Right now, TSMC, Samsung, Intel, they're all using it.
Okay.
We have the U.S. has patents. There are patents, patented technologies that are U.S. patented technologies within that unit, and we are preventing that technology to go to China.
Okay.
The Netherlands is not happy about it. China is very not happy about it. And unfortunately for China, we're not going to allow that technology to go over to China. And so we do have kind of a monopoly right now over the technology and going into that smaller node of technology. They're quickly trying to build around that, and they're innovating, and they're trying to build around that. The lens on this machine, this EUV machine, extreme ultraviolet lithography technology, is just absolutely amazing. It strikes a pin droplet of tin thousands of times per second, and it vaporizes this tin into a different, like, the technology is just absolutely amazing. But the lens on this laser is like 0.00 to the 16th scale. So being able to recreate what they're doing, it takes 1 year to build one lens for this EUV tool. And to be able to recreate what they're doing is very, 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 very hard. And China is trying with all their might to try to recreate it, and they can't. And so this technology is just bleeding edge. And like I said earlier, let me put this in perspective. We're building transistors now at 3 nanometers at full production. They do go lower. We are able to make them lower than that, but at full production, we're able to make transistors at 3 nanometers. That's 15 atoms wide. Yeah. We're stacking atoms to make transistors today, and so we've gone from a single transistor to a chip that has 2.6 trillion transistors on it.
Right.
It's crazy to scale that. You know how we've gone from, in 74 years, we followed Moore's law, and we've scaled it down so far. And it's amazing to watch.
Yeah, if you really want to get in some of the numbers game, let's watch this, if you guys don't mind. Tell me if the audio is good to go.
100 million.
Okay.
Is the audio coming through?
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Sure, good.
Well, 100 million calculations a second is what's required to run Mario 64 from 1996. We need more power. Maybe 100 billion calculations a second? Well, then you would have a computer that could run Minecraft back in 2011. In order to run the most realistic video games, such as Cyberpunk 2077, you need a graphics card that can perform around 36 trillion calculations a second. This is an unimaginably large number. So let's take a second to try to conceptualize it. Imagine doing a long multiplication problem once every second. Now let's say everyone on the planet does a similar type of calculation, but with different numbers. To reach the equivalent computational power of this graphics card and its 36 trillion calculations a second, we would need about 4,400 Earths filled with people, all working together and completing one calculation each every second. It's rather mind-boggling to think that a device can manage all these calculations. So in this video, we'll see how graphics cards work in 2 parts.
So
31,000 years. It'll take you 31,000 years to count to 1 trillion. That's how big that number is.
Yeah.
if you know why I'm excited, this is why I'm so excited.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It is
But,
an amazing number.
So is Nvidia the only game in town when it comes to that, or as far as
no,
no?
AMD is competing. Intel's actually coming in with different, obviously Nvidia is leading the pack, right, by a far margin. And but it's not the bleeding edge that we don't need the bleeding edge for everything. So AMD's got an incredible market share, and Intel's coming in with new technology as well that they're going to have a market share as well. Obviously at the lower end of that. But AMD or Nvidia is absolutely just the bleeding edge of the technology right now. So
okay. So is it safe to assume that that the AMD chips will be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Nvidia when it comes to this type of processing?
No, I would say side by side, but not shoulder to shoulder.
Okay.
Everybody has their own strength. Everybody has their own strength. The AMD and Intel will have the inference market, where this is the training market, right? So this GPUs are for training, because you need 36 trillion operations for training purposes. But when you're doing inferences, you're not going to need that much of information. What you're doing is taking that trained data and talking to that trained data through a system that can do the inferences in good amount of time with zero amount of latency. So if your trained data is very good, the inference is not going to be a problem. But then again, inference is not NVIDIA's game. It's somebody else's game, right? The inference is chips, and this is something that I'll talk to you about this in two different directions, right? One is that this GPUs, that the way we have it now, we might not need it in the future because the changes in the configuration from 64 bits to 1 bits, right? So if it goes to a 1 bit and you have a 1 bit large language model, you will have a processing of training those data in total different environment, right? You can train those data now using a CPU instead of GPU. CPUs are not used for training for obvious reasons. CPUs are mainly known for inferences, right? But now CPUs are probably going to be something that you can use for training. So the game will change in that direction if we find out that your IoT devices does not require a GPU to train the IoT device data, because IoT is so small. So these IoT devices could have, and this is not something theoretical, NIST has already put out an SLM guidance best practice for IoT devices. So that means that small language model that you put inside of an IoT device, it's already in a NIST publication. And if something is in a NIST publication, that means it's way too mature and has aged very well. The NIST has to put out a guidance about it, right? So these SLMs that are coming into the market, they might start shifting this whole conversation and saying, like, you got a GPU game and we got CPU game. GPU game plays in a different environment. The CPU games plays for all the consumers, because consumers are not really going to rely on GPUs 100% of the time. Now, let's talk about the separation between consumers that are just using things on 1 bit level, GPU, CPU level, right? But you got this whole GPU game over here that you cannot do without GPU. That's the only thing you can do is have a GPU. And there's a whole market for that. And let's talk about that specifically, because that's the second prong of the conversation, is that these current system of H100, it's maturing to a point that the next generation is already here, and then the H100, which is the latest, is already a legacy. So when I told you guys earlier about the decision makers really have to understand infrastructure, because the next one that comes around, they're going to say, whoa, hold on a second. How did this happen? I just bought this H100 2 months ago. You're telling me in the next 12 months they're irrelevant and I cannot even make money off this H100 because I paid $100 million for it? Right?
Before they power on the data center, it's already outdated.
Before the data center is even complete, that's outdated, because this B100 requires a whole other data center, because you cannot put B100 and B200 on a data center that you built so far, because the electricity, the electric power that I'm gonna put a comparison here, but this is not an accurate number. It's like if H100 used 30 megawatts, B100s are going to use 130 megawatts.
Mhm.
So the data center.
Yeah, but isn't there something else that's coming out now that uses less right now? That's in production.
B100 and B200 is what the latest is. But if you think about neural processing, what is it? NPUs, neural processing unit.
Mhm.
Those are still on that lab environment. Like there is no mass production for it. So the difference between NVIDIA and everybody else is that everybody still is in theoretical level. But NVIDIA has been manufacturing these GPUs for the last 15 years. They have nothing to prove to anybody except for either you buy it or just move on, right? Their competition is almost non-existent. So when they're talking about B100 and B200, it's because they have to address that AI inference piece. Because the biggest gap right now is not your training power, it's the memory power. So if you have like good training and good memories, which B100, B200 is like 80% higher than the current memory on H100, right? So if you want to do a specific type of business, a specific type of training and inferences, you have to go with B100 and B200, right? And your consumer base is probably just that big that they're not going to settle for anything from H100. They're going to go for B100, B200. And for those, like I said, you need a specific type of concrete slab in order to hold those server racks. Like that's how insane weight those things are, because the air cooling doesn't cut it. It's the water cooling, and you have to get to the GPUs, the transistor level of cooling it, not necessarily cooling it just a box, right?
Yeah. And I also like to talk about like how to understand that we're now building transistors at 3 nanometers, which is a scale like we followed Moore's law for 74 years. It's a trajectory that's gone like this for 74 years. We've gone from a single transistor to a chip with 2.6 trillion transistors on it. Now we change architectures. We start doing 2D stacking, 3D stacking. Now it's about computational power. Right? How much computational power with the least amount of energy density that I can put into this, into this chip? What is the amount of computational power that I can get out of this chip now? And so the standards have changed, right? Because Moore's law is more or less dead. And so now we're doing different technologies with architecture and computational and 2D stacking and 3D stacking and all these different systems that we're trying to innovate now to be able to make these chips faster and better. And
well, we don't have the alternative, because the demand from the industry is that you cannot sell me the same chip that you sell to Merck and I'm Toyota. I don't want the same chip. Merck has his Merck business, Toyota has a Toyota business, right? Or what's other companies that we can think of? Just any manufacturer that's thinking about it right now is like, I'm just going to build a bunch of these wafers and just sell them all like to everybody. It's not going to work anymore. You really have to start manufacturing these chips. And I think we talked about Elon Musk earlier before the recording started, because Elon Musk said, if I want to build a fab, I want to build a fab where I can eat a cheeseburger right next to the fab system that's manufacturing it.
Yeah.
Wild conversation to have. But that's literally what the signal is for the fabs right now. The demand signal is you have to manufacture that fast, right? We talked about just in time earlier. On demand means if I want it, I need to have it by the next 3 months, not 3 years from now, because my life cycle cannot be 3 years long for me to go from R&D to have something in consumer's hand, right? It just cannot work that way anymore. So there's a shift that's coming. The demand signal is coming, and U.S. market. Like, if you think about it, everybody sees what's happening in Texas. Everybody sees what's happening in Micron in New York. Everybody sees all the data centers. That's just US. Now imagine the rest of the world, what they're working on. Because they're in the same competition as US. They're trying to build their own fabs. They're trying to build their own semiconductor chips. They're trying to control that supply chain. They're trying to bring everything local, kind of like the edge devices. So they're bringing data centers and the fab side by side. Right. So the demand signal is shifting in such a way that if you're thinking about the hardware from the perspective of 15 years ago, of the supply chain planning for 15 years ago with the hardware, think again, because large language model is going to make your supply chain that much easier to control. But large language model is not going to get your hardware in your stack as fast as you like it to be, because this large language model is just a vaporware as soon as you don't have the hardware. Right. I can leave it at that, but I will say the right hardware means the best LLM. Because if your LLM is just sitting there wondering about planet Mars and Jupiter, and your business is to supply coffee over here, it just is not the language model you need. So unless you have a hardware next to your coffee station, you're not going to do large language model the way you're intended to, supposed to, right? Scary, but exciting at the same time.
Yeah. There's just not, I'm having discussions with vice presidents of TSMC, and you know, I'm calling to the vice president of TSMC, and they're saying, Robert, we're booked. Yeah. You know, we don't have capacity anymore. We've got a handful of clients, and that's all we can really handle. We're booked. And then I'm watching Elon book up Samsung. There's not a lot of if you're looking at EUV technology, there's not a lot of space to, if you're not in talks already with one of the manufacturers around the world of EUV tech, like, you're not going to be able to get chips, period, because there's not going to be enough fabs to produce the chips that we need.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
NVIDIA is booked till 2028. So everybody's in the same boat. Hardware stacks. NVIDIA, $5 trillion company, all hardware. They're booked.
And Elon's taking data centers to space. No questions asked. He's already doing it. I'm working with clients that have GPUs in space right now. They're already doing it. Elon is launching data centers in space by 2030. We're 40% of data centers in space.
Yeah, Google's doing the same thing.
Yeah,
it's happening.
So I read an article last week about Apple and this M5 chip. And I don't remember the size, but they're saying that this is one of the chips that Apple is trying to, keep everything in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right. And to build their own data centers that consume less energy. That's and how it's working right now and how quickly they're going to get that out there is probably going to challenge everybody else right now, because they're definitely trying to get into that space. So, have you heard anything about that, Robert? Or
my first impression here is that this is not a one-way street. This is not from my device to data centers in Apple. It's everybody's data center coming through Apple's data center to your device. That's the big market right there, Robert.
And to also understand that, like, there's different games in town. TSMC is a very enclosed system. You're going to do the packaging through their system. You're going to do the design. You're going to do everything through the TSMC way. Intel is saying, BYOB, bring your own chips, and we'll build it. It's like they're willing to work with anybody, and they're saying, bring your own chips, and we'll make whatever you need, and they're doing it all here in house. Now they do have EUV. They're doing EUV technology here in the US, and they're working at scaling that. That's it's not a matter if you own it, if you build it, they will come. You have to build it, and you have to perfect these recipes, and you have to spend years trying to perfect those recipes. TSMC is way above everybody else. They have started this race eons ago, and they're way ahead of everybody. So they're going to lead the pack, and Samsung's going to fall in a little bit, pretty far, a little bit behind them, and then Intel's going to fall in a little bit behind them. And so these companies are scaling and trying to build these huge 40, Samsung Austin is going to be a $40 billion facility, the EUV facility. TSMC in Arizona is what is it up to? Is it up to like 60 billion or something like that? But I wanted to put something in perspective and see if that you were talking about in these data centers and the power consumption that these data centers use. Apparently, I was reading the other day, they said that the data center in Abilene, Texas, that they're building, the Stargate project, this place will use, by the time it's all said and done and completely running at full capacity, it will take 5 Hoover dams to run this place.
Not much. Not much.
That's a lot of electricity. That's a lot of electricity. So
Yeah.
I'm really concerned about power, right? How do we build power stations for these facilities too? And
Yeah, that's where I was going.
I'm-
See, the thing is that okay, so they're talking nuclear, right?
yeah, I got to go to
Power
A&M and
plants.
actually visit one of their nuclear sites.
Okay, okay. So would that be a good, or are there other alternative methods besides nuclear that would kind of take that load down a little bit?
Small nuclear reactors are going to be the answer. And
Mhm.
the trick is that right now it's about a 3 to 5 year federal zoning. And
Right.
so I believe what they're doing with Texas A&M right now is going to be it's at the Bush compound there at Texas A&M. They're going to have a small nuclear reactor. They're going to be doing testing on it. I believe they're going to share that with the government, and government's going to have to fast track small nuclear reactors around the U.S. And they fast tracked the zoning for Texas A&M in less than 12 months. So just they can do it, and we'll have to fast track that federal zoning for those small nuclear reactors, and then start building those smart nuclear reactors to power those facilities.
Yeah, I think we kept the conversation here out of software and data, but hardware. But we're heading in the right direction because we got to move beyond the hardware into power supply, into the water. Because Hoover Dam, right? That's water generating electricity. So where does the water come from? What if Hoover Dam is dry and the water is not coming through? Where does the electricity come through, right? So where's the propulsion happening? So speaking on that specific target topic, the power supply and the water, there's so many ways you can generate electricity. But one of the things that we know for a fact, and then this is what Robert is talking about, is that wherever the power station is, by the time its power is delivered, 60% of them is lost. So we're only using 40% of it, right? So the power that we currently have, we really have to do something to make sure that we don't lose those powers in transit, right? So when the power is coming from wherever the power is generated from, by the time it gets to my house, most of those powers has been lost. And that's a life cycle of power forever. So one of the things that I really am pushing a lot of people to stress their imagination. I said, like, look, I know you're starting with that one tree in the forest, but you're missing the full forest because you're looking at a tree called ChatGPT, right? You cannot look at Gemini. Some people have the luxury of looking at it that way, and it's fine, but not everybody. Not everybody that's making sure that they're writing the check, and that check is feeding somebody's family, maybe 30, 40, 500, 50,000 of them, that they're really relying on you to make the right decisions, right? You cannot be that guy that has the luxury to say, just ChatGPT and large language model is enough for me. No, you got to push your imagination far out from that. Just to give you an example of what happens in national level if we do artificial intelligence correctly, beyond just large language model. I'll use always these two examples that really fits into the issues that we're talking about. If you can figure out how to evaporate water differently than the way we do right now, you will solve 80% of the world's problem. If you can evaporate water in a new ways, other than using heat, the way we do right now with the sunlight or just fire under it, if you can evaporate water differently, which we are counting on machine learning to figure that out, because our imagination has hit the ceiling over and over. But then you can imagine what sort of compound, what kind of burn rate do you need in order to make that burning so efficient that water evaporates with minimal amount of effort, right? Amount of calories, that's what the word is, right? Calories. That's one. But the other one I talk about is that molecules. You see, when you're evaporating water, you're actually, what you're doing is knocking those molecules in a certain direction so they evaporate quickly, disappears fast. That will solve your HVAC problem. That will solve your electricity problem in major ways. So nuclear is not even a question that you were like, you know what, I got to worry about that thing. But ultimately, that power that you lose in between from now until that technology comes along, because the water evaporation is better, you have to do something about those power losses. So you really have to build an electricity plant right next to your house. You have to have it next to each house. You have to have a portable electricity generator everywhere you go, because that's the way you minimize the power loss, right? That's just the physics of it. There's no other way of building a wire that doesn't lose power. So if you can push the direction that way, I think some of the things that happens out of just that water evaporation. Let me give you another example of that. If you can use machine learning, which you have a big finger here, you cannot push a molecule with this finger, right? But you can create a machine learning tool, which we have seen, actually, we have calculated that much of a molecule that if you can knock a molecule off of its trajectory, the way the molecules are growing, you can knock a cancer out before it even is a possibility. You are knocking diseases off of a human body before those diseases are even mentioned, right? Because that's what you're doing. Just like you evaporate water, you're knocking the molecules off of a human body to a trajectory that it never turns into cancer. It never turns into that disease state from whatever state that's in right now. But machine learning has to sit there and see through all the molecules and say, that molecule combination is deadly. We are almost a step close to that because DeepMind has done the research about the protein folds. What is the next step after that? You go after those molecules. You start knocking those molecules in exact direction using a machine learning, some sort of vapor tool, knock them molecules out of the way. In the future state, the machine learning figured out that's a cancer molecule. Knock that one out. Knock this one out. This one turns into that. Do you see where I'm going with this? It's just innovation after innovation. All you have to do is kind of sit through and say, like, no matter what the power cost is, no matter what the things that we're dealing with right now, it's going to be worth it if we are getting to that stage, right? Because we're going to solve the power consumption problem. We have solved all the problems, but you cannot take the bath water and put a baby out with it, right? Power is a problem, but that does not mean you just stop the AI production, right? Because these AIs are going to create such an amazing technology. But if you think like I'm just thinking about theory here, futuristics, I'm not, because about 2 years ago, 2023, they actually created the amount of power of the sun in the earth. And the reason that they found out that they did that and the calculation they were able to do that is because of machine learning. Unless you dive into that machine learning part of it, you will never find out that's how they calculated it. Because the amount of power that they generated was the power of sun in the earth. And they created that to say, we have put in enough electricity to this system that has created enough power to have a good ROI, right? Return on electricity, this just worked. But the way that they captured it is so small, so tiny, using machine learning technology, AI technology. So I think this water conversation and the power generation conversation is going to go to a whole nother direction in 5 years. I think it's very painful right now to talk about, but I am so optimistic that that's where the things are heading towards, that we're going to generate power in our backyard and we're going to do it so many more places that we're just going to have to go back to that original physics. Generate the power in your backyard and save some.
Things are changing in my industry like so fast. Everybody's screaming, oh, water usage. Well, yeah, like 3 years ago, we were screaming about water usage because fabs like Samsung Austin was the largest consumer of water in Central Texas. Well, now we're reclaiming a lot of that water. And now fabs the technology has changed. And so now we're not having to worry about that because now we're reclaiming so much more water. Data centers are reclaiming water. Fabs are reclaiming water. Now we're at like a 90-something% reclaim rate. And so now we don't worry about water consumption at fabs or data centers. And so, those worries, and it's funny because people don't know that, and they're still saying, "Oh, what data center bad because it's going to use too much water." Well,
it's the first I'm hearing it.
It doesn't anymore, because that technology's changed, and we're now reclaiming the water, and so but same with electricity and all these other it's going to innovate, right? It's going to evolve. The innovation is going to evolve, and we have to keep up with that.
So how does that relate to this water reclamation, to the type of chips that are used in order to make that happen? In other words, okay, so you had the H100s that are a power suck, right?
Yes.
As far as now, are those B100? Is it the B100s? Is that is what's driving this, or is there something else is driving it?
So just the physics of it is that H100 does not have the memory power that B100 does. B100 also does things that are far more efficient, but that far more efficiency goes into a bigger power in calculation, right? So say, for example, if I say 36 trillion is impressive, well, 36 trillion is nothing in my industry because I'm on petabytes level, right? So I'm even higher than terabytes, right? So for 36 trillion is impressive for me now, but I have 3,600,000 trillions of information, right? So really, I need something that is better and faster. But there's an output that comes with it, right? The output is even better, right? This output, say for example, Dr. Strange, right? Dr. Strange does this one thing, like he thinks about like 14 million output, but it only picks one. Now imagine you have 14 trillion outputs and you pick one out of that, right? There's a difference in your output now, right?
Oh, yeah.
So this B100s and B200s really are a power sucker, but that's because they're processing that much data, but they're also bringing that memory, which is the second part of the equation. Because if you don't have a good memory to utilize those AIs are sort of clunky, like ChatGPT is today. You know,
Right,
it's
right.
good up until your chat gets too long, right? You know, you start on day 1, it does good, but that chat has to close at one point because day 30, it cannot hold that information anymore. The memory is kind of going all over the place, you know.
That's when it starts to hallucinate. Right?
It starts to hallucinate. So there's a lot of patch level tricking. Like you can have a document in your desktop, blah, 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 blah. But that over time, like clogs everything up, right? Because the memory is just not there. So you're using a lot of borrowed memories or refreshed memories. But the B100s is bringing that memory and the processing power. I think that's what you asked, right? Sorry, I just have to say that out loud.
No, it's okay. I'm just curious,
and right now, memory is the bottleneck for all hardware. We cannot produce enough memory right now.
Wow.
It's a big issue right now around the world, and so even companies like the Roomba vacuum, they're having to re-engineer to put in different types of memory because they're like, we can't get the memory that we originally had, so now we have to re-engineer to use a different type of memory to be able to use to manufacture their products. Yeah. So it's memory is a big problem right now around the world, trying to get a hold of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to kind of go back to that power sucker equation, the power sucker equation. So let's say, for example, FP4 on B100. So like, floating points and things of the nature. However we should calculate, because it can calculate more, it also calculates so much more exponentially. It's also using that much power. So I can say B100 is bad, but it's not. It's just that it's doing what it's supposed to do. So that's why I separate those two. Say people might move into CPUs because of that 1-bit operation versus FP4s and things of the nature will be in a whole different industry category. And if that is to remind you of anything, I will tell you a whole nother story about quantum computing, because we were talking about it in the space, right? Quantum computing is not even going to be in a consumer side at all. Quantum computing is going to play a whole nother game in a whole nother room in a whole nother world, right? So these B100 use cases are going to be very exclusive. H100 is going to be used. CPUs are going to be used in majority of the use cases, but this B100, B200 is going to be like almost exclusive use cases, right? If I may say, digital twin for NASA, maybe planetary digital twin or something like that. That's what they're going to use it for. And then you got, if you think about it from that stretch, you push it even further, you end up in quantum space. Because if you think about 3 nm, what comes after 1 nm? It's literally in the quantum level at that point, right? So you really have to process data in a quantum level, and there's no coming back from that, right? Yeah. That's like literally saying, I left the land, now I'm in the water, now I'm in the space. It's like a whole nother ball game. But things are moving in the right direction, in my opinion. If anybody asks me anything, the hardware, that's what they promised 10 years ago. That's what they're delivering 10 years later. Hardwares are on schedule. The problem is a lot of people are not engaging with it right now, and they're not bringing their data. They're not bringing their subject matter expertise. They're not bringing their business problem. So B100 and quantum computing, you can leave that alone. All you need is H100. As long as you're a subject matter expert, you don't know much about technology, you're not using technology a whole lot, you have to engage technology in a whole nother layer at this point, because these capabilities that are coming down, that's already here, that's already maturing, kind of turning into a legacy. but you still have to get involved. You have to come in and look at this hardware and say, I'm in the B100 club. I can't do H100. That's just not feasible for me. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And we have to also remember these chips are apples and oranges, right? You know, yes, they're chips, but they're completely different. Another thing, I want to add this to you, Asif.
Yeah.
IonQ just bought Skywater. They now have a quantum computing company just bought a fab. Get ready for quantum computing because it's going to come around the corner really fast. When they're buying fabs, it's going to come around the corner really fast. I've been putting quantum computing on the back burner for a long time until I see them buying fabs.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Quantum computing is around the corner.
Get ready because here it comes. We're fixing to shift again.
What's the company again?
IonQ.
Okay.
IonQ had a merger and acquisition with Skywater Technology.
Okay.
At one point, I think it was $1 or $2 billion, whatever. But yeah, they now have fab capacity to build quantum computing chips, and that's a big signal to me that quantum computing is coming down the pipeline really fast.
So theoretically, what does that mean to people when they say that for encryption, for example, how fast is quantum computing going to affect encryption? We're going to have to go to another level or something to prevent.
We have to innovate.
Yeah. Encryption is already under a lot of threats. There's no quantum computing is just another layer of vulnerability, but we already have so much vulnerability. Like, say, for example, if you just give it enough time with a high processing power of a GPU and a CPU, it can break the encryption probably in a year or so. So the biggest fear that I deal with right now is collecting encrypted data so you can break them later. Like, literally, governments are doing it. So is the hackers, and so are the bad guys.
Oh yeah,
they're collecting encrypted data so they can break it. No matter how long it takes, I'll get there. Right? That's how important those data is up to them. So post-quantum encryption, which is the NIST, what is it? Paper, right? I think it's a paper, not a standard yet. They have 4 or 5 different ways of bringing in post-quantum. But encryption, what it does is it delays things. It doesn't necessarily give you the protection. It gives you the feelings of a protection, right? So I'm not going to say exactly the physical problem here, but philosophically, we really need to identify privacy all over again from a different light. Because the privacy that we don't have today came from not ever having privacy, not ever demanding a privacy. It's just like, okay, you're worried about privacy, let's talk about it, but really, what about it, right? There's no framework on privacy, right? This doesn't have a guideline on privacy. It has a guideline on post-quantum encryption and guideline on so many things, but that doesn't necessarily solve your privacy issues, right? Encryption, all it does is delays your privacy violations, right?
Yeah.
So in a sense, I think we're trying to build technology on top of technology to give us an illusion of privacy. But what we really have to do is figure out another way of communicating between system to system. And to me, that comes down to that zero knowledge proof algorithms. There's infrastructures that are like really power consuming algorithms. But I don't see it any other way. It's just like you have to minimize this communication. You have to minimize those attack surfaces and those sort of things, the data in transit exposures and things of that nature. Really, I think with artificial intelligence, we're going to do a whole lot of that. But quantum computing, on the other hand, does provide similar protection on the other end, which is that when you have a data in transit, if you can create a quantum computing system that shifts your data in transit in different directions, which that's what they're proving these days, is that using quantum computing, they're stopping the man in the middle from listening in, right? You cannot block my communication because my communication will switch channels and go the other way as soon as you interrupt it, right? So these fast processing of data, I think is going to be post-quantum everything, right? Post-quantum encryption, that those encryptions are not necessarily going to be something that we can keep using because they're very clunky and it takes like a lot of weight. right? Because if you think about data has a gravity, you want to minimize that data gravity, right? Make it as fast as lightning, so that way, you don't have this sort of problems. So that's my answer. I don't know how much that cleared things up because nobody knows the answer yet, but that's a good way to go about it.
No, that's good. Yeah. Yeah.
And then we're doing photonics. We're literally transferring the data at the speed of light, right?
That's it.
Yeah. So we're doing photonics now, which is, moving this data at the speed of light. Like the
NPUs are getting into photonics to have the data travel between the chips, right? So it's using lights rather than, we're using fiber wire right now, right? Fiber wire is lights. So how do you use lights in between open space in between transistors?
Yeah. So yeah,
that's good. That's
it's moving at the speed of light. And all this technology is moving at the speed of light. It's crazy.
That's the technology you need to minimize your power consumption and have your data be secured. Because the photonics is the way to go. And there's a German company, you can look it up. Their latest NPU is actually going to challenge the GPU usage in many of this model training.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And it's always about the necessity is mother of all invention, right? So the GPU threats that we have right now, the data center threats that we have right now, is literally going to be addressed in these sort of outside of GPU, outside of data center racks, right? It's going to go into the NPU level because we talked about neuromorphic before the conversation started, right? What about neuromorphic? How does that reduces your power consumption? They're using human brain neurons to make decisions in a $30,000 device. But the problem is you got to keep it cool to 97 degrees at all times, right? And then you're talking about going to the space. So you have all sorts of equations that's coming into place. And sometimes the GPUs are just not the answer that you can take the GPUs to the space. You have to actually really create a hardware that is space friendly. Right.
So it's safe to assume that in space you won't run into that problem of the temperature as far as the processing, or is that going to be an issue?
Well, okay. So in Earth, because of the sun lights, the sun actually interferes with the systems on Earth, right? So now imagine having it in the space with GPUs, which is the same system as Earth. Yeah, the sun is going to cook that system, right? It's going to have all the zeros and ones going from zeros and ones to broken and ones, right? It's going to be broken all over the place because that's what happens. The sunlight, it actually interferes with the hardware in the Earth, right?
So the radiation.
Yeah, exactly. So what is that little things, nucleus and things of the nature, right? It's all traveling inside of your devices and it messes up your zeros and ones and calculation goes all over the place, right? There's a lot of cases you can look that up on the hardware. So if you take it to the space, you really have to create a system that doesn't have that problem of voltage traveling between transistors, right? You have to look at it from the, I don't know, photonics sounds quite good.
They have to be radiologically hardened chips.
Radiologically hardened.
So they have to be radiologically hardened and specially designed for, the EMPs and the radiation of space. And so that's as you get closer to the sun, you have to deal more with that. I've had the fun with working in places like BAE Systems and government technology, chip manufacturing companies, and seeing that radiologically hardened chips for missiles and DoD stuff. And but yeah, anytime you get up there into the upper atmosphere, you have to worry about that. So it changes the game a little bit.
Changes the game a little bit. And that's what I mean earlier, very early in the conversation, is that you really have to worry about the infrastructure if you're a certain person in a certain position writing checks for a lot of people, right? If you're the decision makers, you really have to get accustomed to understanding what is your peers, your operational folks, your tactical folks are talking about when they talk about hardware. Because these hardwares are not going to be presented to you the way it's presented to everybody else, right? Because when there's a vendor information coming through, they're going to say, oh, just get this Dell computer. It will last you for the next 30 years. That's not how things are going to move anymore. It's not Dell computers and Dell monitors going forward. No offense to Dell. I'm just saying. Like,
they would like to get in on that action. Well, they managed to survive a lot of different changes, over the years. So,
compact, right?
Compact, yes. Gateway. Yeah.
Gateway. Yeah, they
Yeah.
survived. They'll still survive to
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Um, I can go on about this whole
Yeah.
conversation for days, but
Okay.
this is
It
how
could.
it is with Robert. It's just you sit down with Robert and you just keep
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been quite
It's
an
fun.
education for me.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's
So
fun. But
Mhm.
what's next?
it's a tsunami moving at us right now.
Yeah.
And you know, I was speaking at an event and at a roundtable event, and you know, I had to end the conversation with saying that I have a 9-year-old. I can't imagine the world he's going to live in when he's 50 years old.
Yeah.
I just can't fathom what this world is going to look like. Are we going to be in the Stone Age again, or are we going to be traveling to Mars for a vacation?
Yeah.
I can't tell you.
No.
Like, what is it going to look like? I have no idea what it's going to look like when he's 50 years old.
Yeah.
It's going to be some wild changes. Wild changes.
Yeah, I used to say that if Abraham Lincoln came to visit us in 2000 or 2015s, he would probably ask a bunch of questions. But if he came back in 2025, he's just going to shoot himself in the head again, right? He's going to say, okay, what's the point of even trying to figure this out, right? You're talking about literally writing magics on a computer? Like, what are you talking about, right? I think that if you have the problem of the future that you have today, that's the future you don't want. You want a future with different sets of problem.
Yeah.
Different sets of problem that has nothing to do with this one is the problems on future that I want, right? So whatever the case of future is, Mars or no Mars, Utah, Arizona, we'll fake it, whatever. But the thing is, like, as long as we don't have the same problem that we have today, and that's okay with me, right? Because I have 3 kids, 7, 4, and a year and a half. So I'm going to be okay with it as long as I can see them live through a life and say, you guys messed it up, right? You guys are the ones that didn't do anything about this. There's some risk that you have to accept and some risk you have to mitigate and some risk you just have to say, we'll work on it in the future. Because you cannot walk through all the problems, right? So as a student of risk mitigation and risk management, I always say that, I don't think we're going to have the same problem 10 years from now. We're not, because these language models have shown us something that before language model, we just couldn't really comprehend, like how to get out of this ruts of coding and programming. Because coding and programming gave birth to a bubble that just couldn't expand anymore. But because of the language model, the software 3.0, all of a sudden we're looking at it like, yeah, that bubble is going to just pop anytime. But we have a way forward because we're going to have a different source of problem because of software 3.0, right? Because we're moving from software 2.0 to software 3.0. And that's what I mean by 10 years ago, we had a different problem. And 10 years later, we're talking about a different problem. And I'm okay with that.
Even within the last 2 years, like I said, when I jumped in, well, it's been 3 now. When I jumped into artificial intelligence, I recognized something very quickly as to where things were going, and that's why I jumped in with both feet. Just to really. And with some of the things that I developed early on, there are certain standards that were there that's still there today, even though we're still going through the changes, the different categories and things. So the foundation has been laid, and it's pretty good. So going forward, how do we make that work? And right now, you have a whole bunch of snake oil salesmen out there trying to, tell you all these different things. But then when you look at where things are going and how things are kind of sussing themselves out, there is this there's only going to be a few key players, just like when the cell phones came along, you had all these different players, and now the biggest two is Apple and Android. So I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. And going forward, and but what it does do, and I have an appreciation for you can take your imagination and do things with this that you couldn't do before, and it's working. It really does. So I think, you said something earlier about Stone Age versus the Jetsons, right? I think that we're going to go towards the Jetsons. I really do.
I hope so.
So
that means the
yeah.
energy of AI today is like positive, not negative, right?
Yeah,
Like
I think it's positive. Yeah. Well, it's going to work. Think of the gold rush. It's a lot of people lost their shirts, but then we came out of it.
That's right.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing about next generation that we can never put our heads around. What are they going to do that's far wilder than what we thought was wild?
Right.
Nobody will give the next generation the credit ever. The boomers are not giving credit to Gen X or millennials, right?
Well, think about it. Nobody gave confidence in us.
That's
right?
It. Right?
It happens.
Everybody's pecking at each other, but the thing is, we are creating some amazing stuff that last 2 generations would have been like, right? So the next generation, I have no doubt that trend is going to continue, right?
Yes.
Because of this LM, and I think this is kind of hard for me to speak it out loudly, but I don't think we need anything after software 3.0. It's going to give a birth that pushes everything in the one direction that we're not going to look back and say, oh, wow, what did we do before that? Like software 3.0, this LM is literally the last hope of humans' ability to, escalate, right? Go to a level that you cannot go without human language. Once you have mastered the human language, you can communicate with all the humans, all the systems. There's nothing stopping it, right? The software 3.0, you don't have to think about intelligence at all. Just forget artificial intelligence completely. Just that LLM, the software 3.0, that ability to write codes and talk to a system like a human language is going to eliminate so many of your hardwares. Like if your system doesn't have LLM in it and you cannot speak to it, you're going to stop using it.
That's right.
That's why it's really hard for me to say it, because you cannot predict future. But if I have to predict one future, that's the one. This dumb monitor needs to go. It doesn't do anything other than just display. It doesn't talk back to me, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You gotta go. They don't do anything but just take this, visualization and presents it to a screen. These are dumb systems. They do not have large language model built into it. They got to go.
Will be change.
It's changing.
It's changing. Going to be a lot of change.
Yeah,
for sure.
So unfortunately, I will end the conversation. I was planning on 45 minutes long conversation, but since Robert joined, let's change it up, right?
We've doubled that number.
We did it without Bobby.
Oh God, if Bobby had been here, man.
Oh my goodness, that's another legend. So I'll leave it at that. But before we go, just put in a last thought, and we can wrap this up. But amazing conversation, fellas. Amazing conversation.
Yeah. Get ready for change. That's all I got to say is I'm working with a lot of universities and they're trying to get this next generation trained up for this technology change. I'm like, guys, we don't have to educate 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds. We need to re-educate the whole world. The whole world has to learn how to learn again, and everybody's got to learn their new jobs. So get ready for change. I have to laugh because Obama ran on the campaign of change. Right. Unfortunately, this is the era of change. This is going to be the biggest era of change we've ever seen in history.
Yeah.
And this is get ready for change, because change is coming. If you're not able to change, you're going to be left behind. You got to learn how to change.
Yeah.
Leonard,
I agree.
Any departing thoughts?
Well, yes. So right now, I've seen, I've been following the technology efforts in Africa, and there was a a gentleman that, as far as energy conservation, figured out a way to take this one village and just using solar and wind and everything to power that village where they didn't have power before, to run their computers and things. And what's amazing about all of this is that because of satellite type technology and things, it has really sped things up, because before it used to be there were places in Africa where people were stealing the copper lines and all that, and it would take forever to get communicating. Now you can just do it, because of the where the technology is, and that's going to speed things up going forward, I believe. As far as the innovation, there's innovation in Nairobi, Kenya, for example. There are data centers there and call centers in Nairobi that people are doing things, testing things for companies here in the States. That's happening right now. So, I think as far as everybody getting on the same page worldwide, I think it's going to happen. I really do. And the things that we're doing right now, even the translation is no longer a barrier, language and things, because you could talk in real time. They just come out on the iPhone, and you can speak English, and somebody hears it in Mandarin. So that kind of. So I think we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. And I completely agree. We got so much to do. And I think in spirit, we're all educator. And that's what we're going to do, is we're going to educate people on topics that they might think is uncomfortable, but that's how change happens. You get uncomfortable, and change comes to you, right? So if it's time to change, it's time to change because you're uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable, that means you're changing automatically. Right?
That's right.
So, I push the envelope in these sort of conversations because we really have to push people's imagination. So when you expand and you come to shrinking again, come back to the original state, you are better off because you've been through that uncomfortable expansion. Now you have come to that form where you're going to start doing things because you've learned a lot, right?
Yes.
Because knowing, doing, and being is the state that we have to be in. And uncomfortableness comes from knowing, but when you start doing, you already know why you've been so uncomfortable and how that's paying off, right?
That's right.
So I push the decision makers all the way to the future, and I say, it's not just about you. It's about people that you're employing. It's about the human in the loop. It's about that workforce development. It's about having that workforce, a future that everybody is moving along just fine, right?
Right.
Problem sets that we're thinking of today, as long as that's not a problem 10 years from now, that's the type of problems we want. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you guys so much for this amazing conversation. So we'll go off camera, but we'll be online. Just hang on tight.
Okay.
Is out.
All right.
Cheers.